Hello, Bay Ridge. Welcome to a special edition of After Hours. We're going to be taking a session here to talk with Warren and Amy as we are considering and praying right now as a congregation whether Warren is being called to join the team of elders here at the church. We thought it'd be a good idea just to let everybody hear a little bit about Warren and Amy's story, their background, their passions in life, to help us get to know them a little bit. So, Warren and Amy, welcome to After Hours.
Thank you.
So why don't we start, Warren, we'll start with you. Tell me a little bit about your background, where you were born, grew up, your family background.
Yeah. So I grew up in Annandale, Virginia, which is just about 15 minutes south of DC. I actually grew up in the house. My dad grew up across the street, so I grew up across from my grandparents. Just in a nice, neighborhood. Went to Annandale High School. My grandfather was actually chief of DC Park Police, so I spent a lot of time, in the city a lot, doing different things like that. And then my mom was from Puerto Rico originally. She came here when she was 25 and met my dad, and then, grew up, like I said, in Annandale.
Okay, all right. And Amy, how about you? Tell us.
My twin sister and I were adopted from the Philippines, and we came over to the States when we were 3 years old.
Okay.
So we grew up in northern Michigan. So my parents were Caucasian. So I would say a lot of my upbringing as a child was just kind of figuring out how to fit in, try to assimilate and, just kind of understand this like new culture that I was being brought into. So, all to say it was a really good childhood. And my father, who was an orthodontist, he had his own practice and then eventually sold that practice. And then we moved to Morgantown, West Virginia, where I continued, junior high and then high school.
Okay.
And then eventually I went to Calvin College, back to Grand Rapids, Michigan. For my undergraduate,
Okay.
and I studied art.
Did you ever get to go back to the Philippines and see where you were born?
Yeah, actually, my sister and I did have the really unique opportunity to go back to the Philippines and meet some of our biological siblings and see where we might have grown up. So it was a really humbling and eye-opening experience. We actually had a chance to visit the orphanage where we spent the first couple years of our lives. And there were actually staff members there who remembered us because I guess at that time it was kind of rare to have twins.
Twins, yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Wow, so that must have been quite an experience.
Yeah.
All right, Amy, we'll start with you this time. What about your employment? What is it that you do for work now?
So I've been very blessed to be able to work in a field where I studied, in graduate school. So I have a background in fine arts, visual arts, and I have a master's degree in arts management. So right now I'm working at an art studio and gallery in DC that specifically supports adult artists with disabilities.
Okay.
So I work with about 40 different artists with varying disabilities, cognitive and developmental disabilities.
Okay.
And I get to work with other of staff members who, we work with them to encourage them in their art making, and we also help them to sell their art and basically train to be professional visual artists.
Okay. And you do some art on your own.
And I do some art on my own. Yeah, I do a lot of different things.
Okay. And Warren, you're not an artist.
I am definitely not an artist.
So what do you do?
So I'm a defense contractor. So I work for I manage contracts for the Assistant Secretary of the Army. So we do a lot of environmental, energy, and legislative affairs for the Assistant Secretary of the Army. But the cool thing is I work for a company that's owned 100% by Alaska Natives, by the Inuit Nation of Alaska.
Okay.
The company is on a little island about 50 square miles outside of Castle Cape, Alaska.
Wow.
So when we have board meetings, we literally have, tribal elder meetings and tribal council meetings, talk about fry bread recipes and different things like that. So it's kind of a unique company to work for. And the name of the company is called Ngayut, which means trusted hunting companion that won't accidentally shoot you in the back. So
Well,
that's how
a
that
good thing if you're
translates.
working for the Department of Defense.
Exactly.
Hopefully it works in. And so is all of their work then with DOD? Is that what they do? All their work, or they have other work as
They
well?
have other works. If you ever watched the show Deadliest Catch, they
Okay.
actually managed one of those fishing boats for a while. They actually sold it. They used to do a lot of salmon fishing, but the hatchery shut down, or the cannery shut down. So now they're kind of, they don't have a lot. So
Okay.
our defense contracts like help the
Yeah,
village.
a big part
So
of it.
this contract that I'm working on now, because of that, they were able to hire a teacher to come back and get kids back into school because they
Okay.
actually could afford a teacher now, kind of stuff like that.
Wow.
So.
Oh, that's amazing. All right. Well, for both of you, Warren, since you were talking, we'll start with you. Tell me a little bit about your background, how you came to Christ, whether you were raised going to church, and then when you really became conscious of understanding the gospel.
So I was raised in a Christian home, and we went to church every Sunday, and but my parents didn't really talk about faith a lot. It was just something that we did. And I had a faith moment, I guess, when I was playing on my little swing set with my sister. I was about 6 years old, and she's like, "Hey, do you want to go to heaven? Because if you don't, you're going to go to hell." And I was like, she's like, "But if you pray this prayer, you'll go to heaven." So I was like, "Oh, okay, sure. I'll pray this prayer. So I prayed the sinner's prayer, but I didn't really know what I was praying. But I was like, okay, I guess I'm going to heaven now. Um, but it kind of didn't really stick. I mean, like I said, going to church. I mean, we went to church every Sunday, and we had Bible study and stuff like that. So I've always had faith. But it wasn't until like I graduated and I started going to my own church and I made my faith my own, and I really started exploring I went to a different church than my parents, just finding my own faith. And that's when I started to it started to kind of click for me. Like this faith thing is real. And that's when I sort of developed a deeper walk with it.
And when was that exactly? High school, college?
It was around when I was like 20, 21,
Okay.
something like that. Yeah. So
Yeah.
I was still in college. Yeah.
Okay. So good. And Amy, what about your faith journey?
Oh, wow. I would say that my faith journey was really informed by my adoption. I had sort of talked a little bit about, growing up as an adopted kid. My sister and I were the only brown kids in our neighborhood growing up. And so I think I was really preoccupied as a child and even as a young adult with my identity. And I think I always struggled with being good enough, or having this fear of being left behind. So my mom was a Christian. She took my sister and I to church. My father was not. He stayed home, wasn't interested in any of that. So I think growing up, I felt like I could choose, I could choose to go to church, but I could also choose not to. So it felt, it didn't really have that much of an impact on me. But as I said, I was really preoccupied with my own identity and how was I going to fit into this world, kind of looking different than everybody else. And I think all the way through junior high, high school, even into college, I really was concerned about my grades, excelling. And I think it wasn't until after I had graduated from Calvin. I mean, I did go to a Christian college, which I'm very grateful for. I really made amazing friends. I was not a Christian at the time. The school did not require that you had to be a Christian. But I think it was when I was in graduate school that it really finally hit me that all this focus on myself and being good enough was just never going to pan out. And everything that I had learned at Calvin kind of came crashing down on me. I had started attending Park Street Church, which is a pretty well-known church in Boston. And I was also attending a Chinese evangelical church too. So it was actually through my Chinese friends that I really became aware of who God was, because I thought, here are these Chinese American young professionals seeking their place in the world. And I realized that, God isn't just for Caucasian people, and it wasn't like I needed to I had to pretend I was Caucasian. I could just be myself.
Yeah.
And I realized that God was for everybody,
Right.
and He created everybody. And I think that was the beginning of my faith journey, was really stopping this preoccupation with, who could I invent myself to be, but who did God want me to be after all this?
Right.
So.
Okay. And what was your graduate school in the Boston area?
I studied arts management at Boston
At
University.
Boston University. Okay.
Yeah.
So you were at a Catholic school, going to a couple of different evangelical churches after having gone to Calvin College. That's rather eclectic. So we'll fast forward a little bit. How did y'all meet each other? Jump out there, whichever one of you wants to go first.
Go for it.
So I was leading some small groups, and Amy was a part of my small group. So, and didn't really get to know her. It was a kind of a large group. There were maybe 20 folks in the group, and Amy would kind of come in late and leave early, and so didn't really get to know her all that well. And it was one Friday after a Good Friday service in DC. And
that's a great time
That's
to have
a
a
great-
beginning to get to
great-
Good Friday.
Yeah.
Exactly. So I went to Good Friday with a couple guys from my small group, and it was dark, and so because they always dim the lights, and we were going to go out to dinner afterwards with the guys, and my friend Philip was like, "Oh, let's wait for Amy," and I was like, "I didn't even see Amy in there." He's like, "Oh yeah, she was sitting right in front of us,"
Yeah.
and it was so dark, like I just didn't even know. So we're hanging out outside the church, and I'm like, "Are you sure you saw her?" Because it's like everyone had left the church by this point. And I'm like, "Are you sure you saw her, Philip?" And he's like, "Yeah, she was there." And I'm like, "I don't think she's there. Let's just go." And he's like, "No, Amy might want to come." And then, like 10 minutes later, Amy walks out. And again, I really barely knew her, but I was like, "Oh, cool. This is fun." And we ended up going to a restaurant on Barracks Row in DC, and it was Amy and all the guys, basically.
Sticking out again.
I know.
You were comfortable in your identity by then.
Right, I was. Sure I was.
Exactly. So yeah, we just kind of hung out that night and talked, and then I think the next couple weeks later we had planned to do some paddleboarding, and no one else could come except for everyone else bailed. So it was just Amy and I. We went paddleboarding and then kind of hung out in Georgetown, and that was it.
Okay. Have anything you want to add in there?
So I was going through a really rough time. When I met Warren, my mother had passed away a little less than a year, and I was still really grieving her. And I was attending. Warren was saying that I wasn't going to the small group very, very regularly. I was just trying to figure out where I wanted to go to church, and I hadn't been going anywhere in particular, except I discovered National Community Church, and it was a big kind of mega church, a theater church, and they had their services in the theater, and it was always kind of dark, and that was where I could go and worship in the dark, and people didn't have to see me crying.
Right.
But I joined a small group because I knew it would be good for me, good for my soul, good to socialize and meet other people. And I didn't know that Warren was actually leading the group. I don't know if you mentioned that. I didn't know he was leading the group, so I didn't really notice him at all. And in the depths of my despair, I just didn't notice a lot. I was just sort of like kind of sleepwalking through those years. But I did go to a Good Friday service, and it was where was it at? Miracle Theater. And the reason I took so long to come out of the theater after the Good Friday service, the service was so moving. I mean, I was just really, really moved by the service, and crying, and I had to clean myself up. So I was kind of waiting until I was more presentable to come out, and these guys were still standing there, and I thought that was just so sweet. They were waiting for me. I'm sure they had no idea at the time what I was dealing with personally, but it just felt so precious, to have these people that actually cared about me. And as Warren said, we got to know each other by just kind of hanging out socially. And eventually, I kind of shared with him what I was going through, and he was just so patient and such a good listener, and didn't judge me for what I was dealing with, and and offered a lot of counsel. So it's a
Well, that's
good
good.
soul.
So how long did y'all, was it from, that first date till you got married, and when was your wedding?
It's about what it was about
2 years.
2 years. I mean, I think it was like we dated for like a year almost, or like 9, 10 months, something like that. And then we got engaged, and then it was about another 10 months to our wedding. So close to 2 years. I
Okay,
guess.
yeah. And what year was it that y'all got married?
2017.
2017.
I remember.
Good job.
I remember.
I put Warren on the spot there.
But I remember.
We were gonna have to do some editing to the after hours video if he got the year wrong. So,
Yeah.
well, good. All right. Well, that's helping us to get to know you. So, what we're going to do for everybody watching, if you tune in next time, we're going to do a little bit more conversation with Warren and Amy about kind of the ways they've been serving in the church, how they came to BRCC, and what some of their passions for ministry and just in life are. So we'll look forward to seeing you on the next special edition of After Hours. God bless.